observed forms of language, a linguistic model proposing.
We've already discussed that the linguistic model proposing that observed forms of language arise from the interaction between conflicting constraints is optimality theory. This theory was developed by linguists Alan Prince and Paul Smolensky in the early 1990s. To put it simply, optimality theory suggests that the rules of a language come from a set of constraints. Some of these constraints favor different aspects of language structure, and they can sometimes conflict. For example, one constraint might prefer clearer pronunciation of sounds, while another might favor a more fluid, faster speech. The idea is that languages are formed based on the best possible balance between these competing constraints. So, when we analyze how a language forms its words or sentences, we look at how different constraints are prioritized and how they interact to produce the language we observe.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. The next question, as a theory of phonological representations, autosegmental phonology includes. Autosegmental phonology. What does the autosegmental phonology include? The first option is well-formedness condition, constraint ranking, intonational phrase, or phonological phrase. So it should include the well-formedness condition. Now, explain in detail what autosegmental phonology studies, how what's the mechanism behind the working of the autosegmental phonology. Also exemplify, give one or two, or give one or two examples of the how the phonological representations in the autosegmental phonology work, and also give me a brief description about the autosegmental phonology, and what's the definition of it, who proposed it, in which work was it proposed, what year was it proposed in. So all of that information as well, including the others that I have already mentioned.
Autosegmental phonology is a theory that examines how phonological features are organized and represented across different tiers or segments of a word, rather than being constrained to a single linear sequence. This theory was developed by linguist John Goldsmith in his 1976 work, Autosegmental Phonology. In autosegmental phonology, the idea is that phonological features can be represented on different tiers or levels of abstraction, and these tiers can interact with each other. For example, a single phonological feature, like tone or stress, might be represented on a different tier from the segmental features of consonants and vowels. Mechanism. Autosegmental phonology works by separating different types of phonological information into independent tiers. This allows for a more flexible representation of features that can interact in complex ways. For instance, tone or pitch might be represented on a separate tier from segmental features like vowels and consonants. This separation can help account for phenomena like tone sandy, changes in tone based on the context, or stress patterns that might not be easily captured by a linear model. Examples. 1. In some African languages like Yoruba, tone is a crucial aspect of pronunciation and can affect the meaning of words. Autosegmental phonology allows us to represent tone on a separate tier, making it easier to see how tone changes or spreads across different parts of the word. 2. In English, stress patterns in compound words, like blackboard versus blackboard, can be represented on different tiers to show how the stress can shift depending on whether the word is used as a compound or separate terms. Well-formedness. Condition. This refers to constraints that ensure that phonological representations conform to the rules of the language. It ensures that the structures and interactions between different tiers adhere to the language's phonological rules. In summary, autosegmental phonology helps to represent and analyze complex phonological patterns by breaking them into multiple tiers, offering a clearer view of how different phonological features interact and affect each other.
All right, now moving on to the next question. Once an inflectional marker is added to a word, so if a word gets an inflectional marker gets attached to a word, what happens after that? So the options are: no further affixation is possible, further derivation of a new word is possible, further suffixation is possible, only partial derivation is possible, and the correct answer is further derivation. I'm sorry, no further affixation is possible. That, yes, that's the correct answer. Explain why, and also exemplify.
When an inflectional marker is added to a word, no further affixation is possible. This is because inflectional markers modify the word to fit grammatical categories such as tense, number, or case, but they do not create a new word. Explanation. Inflectional markers change the form of a word to express grammatical features, but they don't allow for additional affixes to be added on top of them. For instance, in English, if you add an inflectional suffix like "ed" to a verb to form the past tense, e.g., walk becomes walked, you can't add another suffix to walked to further modify it. The word walked is already in its inflected form. Examples. 1. Verb example. If you have the verb play and you add the inflectional suffix "e" to make played, you cannot add another suffix like "ing" to played to create playing. You can only add max "ing" to the base form play. 2. Example. If you take the noun cat and add s to make cats plural form, you cannot add another suffix like "aed" to cats. The word is already in its inflected form. In summary, inflectional markers adjust the grammatical function of a word, but do not allow for additional affixes to be added. Further derivation of new words would require starting with the base form of the word.
Now, the next question: the person who first showed in detail how social tensions and processes can motivate language change was William Labov. The next question is uh, what's the next question? Connection failed. Streaming.
Adding the inflectional suffix "ed" to stream to form streamed adjusts the grammatical tense, but does not allow for any further affixation, like adding "ing" or another suffix. Once streamed is formed, you can't add additional inflectional affixes directly to it.
Next is standard language is the variety of a language considered by its speakers to be most appropriate in only educational contexts, in formal and educational contexts, in official communication, in only elite communication. So, standard language is the variety of language considered by its speakers to be most appropriate in it's all of them are correct. Educational context, formal and educational context, in official communication, in only elite communication. I don't know what the answer to this is, but most likely is formal and educational contexts because that's what mentioned in the books, and you know how net works. National eligibility test, motherfucker. So the next is a term used to describe the structure of a particular speech community and composed of web of ties between individuals is social network, ethnic community, dialect community, individual community. So that should either be a social network or ethnic community, but I will go for social network, and that's the correct option because a term used to describe the structure of a particular speech community and composed of web of ties between individuals most likely constitutes the social network, right? Not the ethnic community, because it's a speech community. So a speech community can have n number of people. Dialect community, it's just absurd. Apart from social network, which seems to be the which seems to be the most scientific term among the options. Next question is the aspect of the conversational structure by which the identity of the speaker changes from time to time. So, an aspect of the conversational structure by which the identity of the speaker changes from time to time. So it is such an aspect of the conversational speaker in which the identity of the speaker changes from time to time. The correct answer: multiple identity social. I'm sorry, the multiple identity content, then turn taking, and then implicature. So it might be turn taking. I would need more elaboration on this one. What really is turn taking?
Turn taking is a fundamental part of conversation structure where speakers alternate speaking turns. It helps manage how conversations flow, ensuring that each participant has a chance to speak. When the identity of the speaker changes from time to time, it refers to how different people take turns speaking in a conversation. Turn taking involves cues and rules about when it's someone's turn to talk and when it's time for someone else to speak. This system is crucial for organizing interactions smoothly.
Can you exemplify a situation where this phenomena of turn taking is in its effect?
Sure. Imagine a group of friends chatting at a cafe. One person starts talking about their recent vacation. After they finish a story, another friend quickly jumps in to share their own travel experience. As each person finishes speaking, the next person naturally takes their turn. This process of each person waiting for their turn to speak and actively listening while others talk is turn taking in action. It helps the conversation flow smoothly and keeps everyone engaged.
Now, the next question is it has two assertions. The first assertion is that in social linguistics and critical discourse analysis, that is CDA, discourse refers more narrowly to the interactive and communicative dimension of language and involves conversation analysis, semiotics, and the dynamic processes of text production and understanding. So, in social linguistics and critical discourse analysis, discourse refers more narrowly to the interactive and communicative dimension of language and involves conversation analysis, semiotics, and dynamic processes of text production and understanding. The second assertion is that in applied linguistics, discourse is any connected piece of speech or writing. So, in applied linguistics, discourse is any connected piece of speech or writing in its social context. Now, both of these are true. I'm sorry, both of these are false actually. So, why is it so that both of these are false? Explain to me in detail. Elaborately explain what critical discourse analysis is, and the first. What does the first assertion mean, and everything that is related to the terminologies used here. The second assertion as well. In applied linguistics, discourse is any connected piece of speech or writing in its social context. What's the deal with it? What's the problem with it? Yeah, everything.
Let's break down the two assertions and why both are considered false. 1. First assertion. In social linguistics and critical discourse analysis, CDA, discourse refers more narrowly to the interactive and communicative dimension of language and involves conversation, analysis, semiotics, and the dynamic processes of text production and understanding. Critical discourse analysis. CDA is a field that explores how discourse shapes and is shaped by power dynamics, social structures, and ideologies. It focuses on the role of language in maintaining or challenging social inequalities. It does indeed deal with the interactive and communicative dimensions of language, but places a strong emphasis on understanding how these dimensions are influenced by and contribute to social power relations and ideologies. Social linguistics. This field studies how language varies and changes in different social contexts. While it does consider the interactive aspects of language, it is broader than just the interactive dimension. It also considers social factors like class, ethnicity, and gender. The problem with the assertion is that it narrows the concept of discourse too much. Discourse in CDA is not just about interaction, but also about understanding the implications of language in broader social contexts, including power and ideology. Similarly, social linguistics covers more than just the interactive dimension of language. Two, second assertion. In applied linguistics, discourse is any connected piece of speech or writing in its social context. Applied linguistics. This field focuses on practical problems related to language use, including language teaching, language policy, and language assessment. In applied linguistics, discourse is indeed often understood as any connected piece of speech or writing. However, it's also crucial to consider that in applied linguistics, the analysis of discourse often involves understanding how language functions in real-world contexts and addresses practical issues like communication breakdowns or teaching methodologies. The issue here is that this definition of discourse is somewhat simplistic. While it's accurate that discourse refers to connected pieces of speech or writing, applied linguistics often explores how these pieces function within specific contexts and how they can be analyzed to solve practical problems. In summary, the first assertion is too narrow in its scope of CDA and social linguistics, and the second assertion, while accurate in a basic sense, oversimplifies the broader and more complex considerations in applied linguistics. Both assertions miss the more nuanced aspects of these fields, which involve deeper analysis and broader contexts.
Explain to me what does the first assertion signify, what it means in simple terms that is easily understandable.
The first assertion is saying that in fields like social linguistics and critical discourse analysis, discourse is focused specifically on how people interact and communicate through language. It includes looking at conversations, analyzing how texts are created and understood, and studying signs and symbols. In simpler terms, it's about examining how language is used in real-life interactions and understanding the deeper meanings and social implications behind those interactions. The assertion is too narrow because it doesn't fully capture the broader scope of how these fields look at language, including the role of power and social context.
So discourse here in social linguistics and CDA refers more narrowly to the interactive and communicative dimension of language and involves conversation analysis, semiotics, and the dynamic process of text production and understanding. So this, as you say, is too narrow to define what CDA really stands for, like power, influences in language use. Is that not true?
Yes, that's correct. The first assertion is too narrow because it focuses only on the interactive aspects of language, such as conversation and text analysis. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, also examines how language reflects and influences power dynamics, social inequalities, and ideologies, which the assertion doesn't cover. So CDA looks beyond just the mechanics of conversation and text production to understand broader social and political contexts.
So, could you give me a real world example of the critical discourse analysis?
Sure. A real-world example of critical discourse analysis, CDA, could be examining political speeches. For instance, analyzing how a politician's speech uses certain language to frame issues in a way that supports a particular ideology or agenda. CDA might explore how the speech reinforces power structures, influences public opinion, or marginalizes certain groups. For example, analyzing speeches on immigration might reveal how language is used to either promote inclusive policies or justify restrictive measures.
All right, moving on to the next question. A model of brain language study that views both behavior and neural activity as consisting of the superimposition of increasingly complex functions upon basic capacities. So, a model of a brain language study which views behavior and neural activity as consisting of the superimposition of increasingly complex functions. Superimposition of the increasingly complex functions upon basic capacities. Superimposition of the complex functions upon basic capacities. So, what is this called? This is the hierarchical model. Now, please go ahead and explain to me everything about hierarchical model. Who proposed it? When was it proposed? In which work was it proposed? Which year was it proposed in? And what it really is, what it stands for, and also exemplify in detail of a case study where hierarchical model could be conducted or is or has been conducted, and what this statement really how this statement that a model of brain language study which views behavior and neural activity as consisting of the superimposition of the increasingly complex functions upon basic capacities is called hierarchical model. How this statement relates with the hierarchical model, everything, do not leave out anything, any instruction that I mentioned.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
Okay, so we just discussed about the hierarchical model. So, a model of brain language study that views both behavior and neural activity as consisting of the superimposition of increasingly complex functions upon basic capacities is called the hierarchical model. Now, I want to understand, I want this to be conceptually cleared in my mind what this statement really talks about, or what this statement really means, and what is exactly the hierarchical model.
The hierarchical model in brain language study is a framework that views language processing as built upon simpler, more fundamental functions. Essentially, it suggests that language abilities emerge from a series of increasingly complex layers of processing. Here's a simple breakdown. 1. Basic capacities. At the foundation, you have basic cognitive and neural functions. These are the simplest forms of processing that handle fundamental aspects of language, such as recognizing sounds or basic word forms. 2. Superimposition of complex functions. As you move up, these basic functions combine to support more complex processes. For example, combining sounds into words and words into sentences. 3. Complex functions. At the highest levels, more complex cognitive tasks are involved, such as understanding nuanced meanings or generating coherent discourse. So, the hierarchical model means that understanding language involves stacking these layers of processing, each one building on the one before it. This approach helps explain how simple neural and cognitive functions contribute to complex language abilities.
So can you elaborate the same thing in simpler terms, something that is not very technical to understand, and in simple conversational language.
Sure. Think of the hierarchical model like a stack of building blocks. At the bottom, you have the basic blocks, like recognizing sounds. Then you build on top of these blocks to create words. Next, you add more blocks to form sentences. Finally, you stack even more blocks to understand complex ideas and conversations. Each layer depends on the one below it. So the simplest things you do with language form the base for the more complicated things you do later. It's all about how basic language skills build up to more complex ones.
So I want to understand. I want to understand who like an example, a real world example wherein a hierarchical model has been applied to a situation, and the results of such application. And I also want to know about who proposed it, and in which work was it proposed, in which year was it proposed.
The hierarchical model is often used in understanding how language processing develops from basic to complex functions. One real world example is how researchers use this model to study language development in children. For instance, when analyzing how children learn to read, researchers start with basic phonetic skills, like recognizing sounds, and build up to more complex skills, like reading full sentences and understanding stories. This step by step approach helps them pinpoint where difficulties might arise and tailor interventions to help children progress. The hierarchical model was notably discussed by scholars like Jean Pierre Changeux and Leonard T. Tadeusz in their work. They explored how brain functions related to language evolve from simpler to more complex processes. The model has been influential in understanding both normal language development and language disorders. The concept has roots in various works on cognitive and neural development over several decades, rather than a single publication in a specific year.
Thing about is that I want to have everything at one place. So, I need the Ring One book. So the things that I want to have, right? So the hierarchical model from psycholinguistics. Okay, I want the book list at the end, mentioned at the end, and book list mentioned at the end. Language learning and teaching. Yes, I need it. Language learning and teaching. I need lexicography. I need syntax. Haven't brought the book, so I'm gonna have to pay probably the cost of not bringing it. But I might have paper to nod in my pen drives as well. No, I should check that out. Yes, that's a good recollection. Okay, now actually what this mentions as hierarchical model was notably discussed by scholars like Jean-Pierre Changeux and Leonard T. Tadous. Leonard T. Tadous. T. Tadous. T. Tadous, baby. The fuck is wrong with French people? All right. So going back, which question was it? 50, 60. Okay, about the hierarchical model, and then the next question is language breakdown due to brain pathology and strongly characterized with more of a production impairment with poor non-fluent speech, poor naming, but comprehension largely intact is the Broca's area.
The condition you're describing sounds like Broca's aphasia. This type of aphasia is linked to damage in Broca's area of the brain, which is crucial for language production. In Broca's aphasia, individuals often struggle with producing speech. Their speech can be non-fluent with effortful and halting output. They might also have trouble with naming objects, but their comprehension of language is usually relatively preserved. This means they can understand what others are saying quite well, even though their own ability to express themselves is impaired. So to sum up, Broca's aphasia is characterized by poor speech production, including poor naming abilities, while comprehension remains largely intact.
The next is a dynamic active process in which the speaker is engaged in language processing to generate a linguistic signal from a concept or meaning. So, a dynamic active process, right, in which the speaker is engaged in language processing to generate a linguistic signal from a concept or meaning, generates a linguistic signal from a concept or meaning is termed as production, of course.
Yes, that's correct. Production refers to the active process where a speaker converts their thoughts or concepts into spoken or written language. It's about how we take an idea or meaning and transform it into a linguistic signal, like forming sentences or words. This involves several stages, including planning what to say, selecting appropriate words, and articulating or writing them down.
The next, auditory perception. Auditory perception is performed by which brain function? So it is performed by the temporal lobe. Now, can you summarize, not an elaborate detail, but just summarize what all these lobes of the brain, the temporal lobe, frontal lobe, occipital lobe, parietal lobe, what all functions do they specialize in? So yes, go ahead and do that.
Sure, the temporal lobe handles auditory perception, meaning it processes sounds. The frontal lobe is involved in decision making, problem solving, and controlling speech and motor functions. The occipital lobe processes visual information, helping us understand what we see. The parietal lobe manages sensory information, like touch and spatial awareness.
Now, the next question has two assertions. For emergence of language in humans over millions of years of evolution, brain has undergone a sea change. Second assertion, evolution of language and evolution of brain are correlated. So both are true. Both are true. Now the next question talks about classroom. So classroom is certainly a left-headed endocentric word. It's the right-headed endocentric. It's a right-headed endocentric word. Explain why classroom is a right-headed endocentric word.
The term classroom is considered a right-headed endocentric compound because the head of the compound, which determines the word's core meaning, is on the right side. In classroom, room is the head because it represents the main idea, and class modifies it, specifying what type of room it is. Thus, classroom is a right-headed endocentric compound where the primary meaning comes from the rightmost part of the compound.
The next, bread, butter. This is a two-headed word. Notary public now. Notary public is a left-headed word. Why is it so? Why is it that the word notary public is a left-headed endocentric compound word?
Notary public is a left-headed endocentric compound because the head of the compound, which determines its core, or meaning is on the left side. In this case, notary is the head of the compound, as it represents the primary role or profession, while public describes the type or context of the notary. Therefore, the compound notary public is considered left-headed because the key part of its meaning comes from the first element, notary.
What is really a notary?
A notary public loan signing agent is a specialized notary public who handles the signing of loan documents. They are trained to ensure that documents are properly signed, witnessed, and notarized in compliance with legal requirements. Their role typically involves verifying the identity of the signers, explaining the documents to them without providing legal advice, and ensuring that all paperwork is completed accurately. This process helps prevent fraud and ensures that the loan transaction is legally binding.
Now, the next option is Piaget. Jean Piaget is associated with the uh, Jean Piaget is associated with the sensory motor development. Sensory motor. So, what are the four stages as prescribed by Jean Piaget?
Jean Piaget, a renowned developmental psychologist, proposed 4 stages of cognitive development. They are 1. Sensoromotor stage, from birth to about 2 years. In this stage, infants learn about the world through their senses and actions. 2. Pre-operational stage, from about 2 to 7 years. Children begin to use language and symbols, but lack logical reasoning skills. 3. Concrete operational stage, from about 7 to 11 years. Children start to think logically about concrete events and understand the concept of conservation. 4. Formal operational stage, from about 12 years and up. Adolescents develop abstract thinking and hypothetical reasoning. Each stage represents a different level of cognitive maturity and development.
So, could you please recap very quickly what are the four stages?
Sure. The 4 stages are 1. Sensory motor, birth to 2 years, where infants explore the world through their senses and actions. 2. Pre-operational, 2 to 7 years, characterized by the use of symbols and language, but limited logical reasoning. 3. Concrete operational, 7 to 11 years, where children develop logical thinking about concrete events. 4. Formal operational, 12 years and up, featuring abstract thinking and hypothetical reasoning.
The next period of longitudinal studies. The period of longitudinal studies is based on the rule based descriptions of child language. Now, explain more. Elaborate more on what the rule based descriptions of child language is and how is it related to the period of longitudinal studies, and when was the what time period is denoted as the period of longitudinal studies, major figures of the period of longitudinal studies, how was it conducted?
The period of longitudinal studies in child language development involves tracking the same group of children over time to observe their language acquisition processes. This approach allows researchers to understand how children develop language skills gradually and how these skills evolve. Rule-based descriptions refer to theories that describe language development as a process of mastering grammatical rules. In this context, researchers analyze how children apply rules like past tense formation or pluralization, and how their use of these rules changes over time. During the period of longitudinal studies, researchers focus on capturing detailed changes in language ability as children grow, often starting from infancy and continuing into early childhood. This period spans roughly from the 1960s to the 1980s. Major figures in this period include Jean Piaget and Roger Brown. Piaget's theories on cognitive development influenced how language acquisition was understood, while Roger Brown's work, particularly on morphological development, provided valuable insights into how children learn and use grammatical rules. The studies are typically conducted by recording and analyzing children's speech and language use at regular intervals, which provides a comprehensive view of their developmental progress.
Now, Eric Lenneberg is the person associated with the biological foundations of language. So, I want you to explain what work does this, the biological foundation of language, explain what was conducted, what was done in the biological foundations of language. Eric Lenneberg, he or she he probably studied the critical period hypothesis. Yes, so briefly explain what biological foundations of language really is, and how Eric Lenneberg is associated with the biological foundations of language. When was the critical period hypothesis proposed? What were the major works of Eric Lenneberg, and when were they proposed?
Eric Lenneberg is best known for his work on the biological foundations of language, which explores how language acquisition is linked to biological processes and the brain's development. Biological foundations of language refers to the idea that language development is not purely a result of factors, but is deeply rooted in our biological makeup. Lenneberg's work emphasized that certain aspects of language acquisition are universal and genetically programmed. One of his major contributions is the critical period hypothesis, which proposes that there is a specific window of time during which language acquisition occurs most easily and effectively. According to this hypothesis, if a child is not exposed to language during this critical period, their ability to acquire language may be significantly impaired. Lenneberg proposed this hypothesis in his influential work, Biological Foundations of Language, published in 1967. His research argued that language acquisition is a biologically driven process and that the brain's ability to learn language is especially high during early childhood. In summary, Lenneberg's work highlighted the importance of biological and neurological factors in language development, marking a significant shift in how researchers understand the interplay between genetics and language learning.
Now the next is Veneman. Veneman is associated with head and dependent marking. So I want you to elaborate on what head and dependent marking really is. How is Veneman associated with the head and dependent marking? When did he propose the head and dependent marking? And what really is head and dependent marking? If possible, exemplify in detail so that I can grasp this concept better.
Head-end dependent marking is a concept in linguistics related to how languages mark the grammatical relationship between words in a sentence. Specifically, it's about whether a language marks the relationship of a word with its head or main part, the part of the sentence that determines the grammatical category of the whole phrase, or with its dependent or subordinate parts. Head-end dependent marking means that the grammatical markers, like affixes or case markings, are placed on or are related to the head of the phrase. For example, in some languages, the verb head will carry inflections that relate to the subject or object dependence. Veneman, who studied these marking strategies, is associated with head-end dependent marking because he explored how different languages use these types of markings to structure their sentences. Head-end dependent marking contrasts with dependent marking languages, where grammatical markers are applied to the dependents rather than the head. For example, in a head-end dependent language, you might find that the verb has the same inflection regardless of the noun phrases it connects, while in a dependent marking language, the noun phrases themselves carry the grammatical markers. Veneman's work focused on how different languages use these strategies and their implications for understanding language structure and typology. His research contributed to our understanding of how languages can vary in marking grammatical relations and how these differences impact language processing and structure.
When did Veneman propose the idea of head-independent marking, and in which work, if there was, a head work under which a subgroup topic such as head-independent marking was proposed?
The concept of head-end dependent marking was notably developed by William Croft, not Veneman. William Croft's work on linguistic typology and grammatical relations, especially in his book Typology and Universals, explores these marking strategies. Veneman does not have a specific widely recognized work associated with the idea of head-independent marking. If you are referring to Veneman, it might be a mix-up or a different focus within linguistic studies. William Croft's contributions, however, are well documented in the field of linguistic typology, and his discussions about head-end dependent and dependent marking are integral to understanding these grammatical concepts.
But here in the question, it shows that Veneman is associated with head and dependent marking.
I see. If Veneman is associated with head-dependent marking in your question, it might be a different context or specific research that isn't as widely recognized in mainstream linguistic literature. Head-dependent marking is a concept in linguistic typology where grammatical relationships are indicated by marking either the head, the main word in a phrase, or the dependent, a word that depends on the head. If Veneman is noted for this, the work might be more specialized or less commonly referenced. Unfortunately, specific details about Veneman's work or the exact publication might not be widely available. If this is part of a particular study or curriculum, checking the specific source or academic context where Veneman's contributions are mentioned would be beneficial.
All right, moving on to the next question. Matthew Dreyer. Matthew Dreyer is associated with the branching direction theory. So, what really is branching direction theory, and how is Matthew Dreyer associated with it? Like, for example, I want to know if when did he propose this, and which work was the branching theory, the branching direction theory proposed by Matthew Dreyer. What are its implications in linguistics? Like, for example, exemplify where this might make a contribution, and if possible, exemplify a real world situation where the branching direction theory is applicable.
Branching direction theory deals with how different languages organize their syntactic structures. The theory focuses on the direction in which syntactic branches expand, either to the left or to the right. Matthew Dreyer, a prominent linguist, proposed this theory as part of his work on linguistic typology. His contributions aim to categorize languages based on their branching direction in syntax. Branching direction theory examines whether languages predominantly have left branching structures, where modifiers or additional elements appear before the head, or right branching structures, where they appear after the head. For example, in English, which is generally right branching, we say the big red car with modifiers, big red, following the head noun, car. In contrast, a left branching language might structure a similar phrase differently. Dreyer's work helps in understanding cross-linguistic syntactic patterns and is valuable for comparative linguistics. For instance, understanding whether a language uses predominantly left branching or right branching structures can aid in language learning, translation, and syntactic theory development.
Now, when did Matthew Dreyer talk about the branching direction theory? What year was it?
Matthew Dreyer discussed branching direction theory in the context of his work on language typology, particularly in his influential work from 1985. This work is part of his broader research into the typological variation and syntactic structures across different languages.
Now, the next is Keenan and Comrie. Keenan and Comrie are associated with the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy. So, I want you to explain what noun phrase accessibility hierarchy means. When did Keenan and Comrie propose the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy? Please exemplify about its mechanism and functioning of the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy. And yes, do that.
The noun phrase accessibility hierarchy, proposed by Edward Kennan and Bernard Comrie in 1977, is a concept in linguistics that ranks different noun phrases in terms of how easily they can be the subject of a relative clause. In simple terms, the hierarchy arranges noun phrases from the most accessible to the least accessible, based on their syntactic role and position within a sentence. The hierarchy looks something like this: 1. Subject. 2. Direct object. 3. Indirect object. 4. Object of a preposition. For example, in English, it's typically easier to form a relative clause with a subject noun phrase, like in the woman who called you, compared to an object of a preposition, like in the house in which she lives. The theory shows how certain syntactic structures and operations are constrained by the grammatical roles of noun phrases. It helps explain why some types of relative clauses are more common or easier to form than others across different languages.
When okay, so it was 1977. I get it now. So in what work, like what are the major works done by Keenan and Comrie, or Edward Keenan and Bernard Comrie in specific, and when were these works proposed by them?
Edward Kennan and Bernard Comrie's key work on the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy was presented in their influential paper, Noun Phrase Accessibility and Universal Grammar, published in 1977. This paper is considered a major contribution to the study of syntax and universal grammar.
What are the other major contributions with respective years?
Edward Kennan and Bernard Comrie have made several significant contributions beyond their work on the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy. 1. Kennan and Comrie, 1977. Their paper on the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy, as previously mentioned. 2. Comrie, 1981. Bernard Comrie's book, Language Universals and Linguistic Typology, which explores various linguistic universals and typological studies. 3. Kennan, 1985. Edward Kennan's work on definiteness and the universal grammar, further exploring grammatical aspects of definiteness and its role in language structure. These works have had a substantial impact on understanding grammatical structures and linguistic universals.
Now, a type of metal and instrument for pressing clothes, that's iron. So, iron, both words are the same but have different meanings. So, that could either be polysemy, it could not be homonymy. Yes, it could be homonymy. Homonymy, that's homonymy. Dark light, dark light, these are examples of antonymy. Flowered lily, this is certainly hyponymy. Style, style, so jargons, linguistic forms used in specific situations, jargons used in specific disciplines. So style, I think, should correlate with jargons, linguistic forms used in specific situations. Logograph, so ideas as forms. I think, yes, logograph, because logograph is a mental idea that is elaborated with inscriptions, like for example, the Chinese characters and the Japanese logographic characters. Now the next is dialect, so it corresponds with isoglosses. LFG, lexical functional grammar. Lexical functional grammar is associated with Lexical functional grammar is associated with Bresnan and Kaplan. So explain to me what really is lexical functional grammar. What's the working mechanism behind lexical functional grammar? And when did Bresnan and Kaplan talk about the lexical functional grammar?
Lexical functional grammar, LFG, is a theory of syntax and grammatical structure developed by Joan Bresnan and Ronald Kaplan. Introduced in the early 1980s, LFG focuses on the relationship between syntax and semantics and how different parts of language interact to produce meaningful sentences. In LFG, the structure of sentences is represented by two main components. One, constituency structure. This part shows how words are grouped into phrases and sentences. Two, functional structure. This part details the roles and relations of different in a sentence, such as subject and predicate. LFG emphasizes that syntax and semantics are closely related, but they are represented separately in the grammar. It also highlights that different languages may use different syntactic structures to express the same functional relations. For example, in the sentence, "The cat sat on the mat," LFG would separate the syntactic structure, how the cat and sat on the mat are arranged, from the functional structure, the roles of the cat as the subject and on the mat as the location. Joan Bresnan and Ronald Kaplan first detailed LFG in their work during the 1980s, with foundational publications such as Bresnan's The Mental Representation of Grammatical Relations, published in 1982, and Kaplan and Bresnan's various papers and books.
Now the next is HPSG. The HPSG is hierarchical. I don't know the full form. I don't know what it stands for. Phrase structure grammar, hierarchical phrase structure grammar. I don't know. I have no idea. So it's not. It's certainly not Bresnan and Kaplan. It might be Pollard and Sag. It might be. So yeah, it is. It certainly is. Pollard. Tell me about HPSG. What just like you did for LFG, in the same way, explain for HPSG. When and who, what work, everything.
Head-driven phrase structure grammar, HPSG, is a theory of syntax and grammar developed by Karl Pollard and Ivan Sag in the 1980s. It emphasizes the role of heads in phrase structure and integrates syntax, semantics, and morphology into a unified model. HPSG focuses on 1. Head-driven approach. The head of a phrase, e.g. the main verb in a verb phrase, determines the structure and properties of the entire phrase. 2. Feature structures. These are complex data structures that represent grammatical information, including syntax, semantics, and morphology. They are used to encode the relationships between different parts of a sentence. 3. Constraint-based grammar. HPSG relies on constraints to describe grammatical rules rather than a set of transformation rules. In HPSG, sentences are analyzed through detailed feature structures that capture both syntactic and semantic information. For example, in the sentence, "The dog barks," the features of barks determine how the noun phrase "the dog" is integrated into the sentence. Pollard and Sag introduced HPSG in their influential works, including Head-Driven Phrase Structure Grammar, published in 1987, and further developed it in their later publications.
Moving on to the next, tag. Tag is associated with Joshi, Arvind Joshi, the tree adjoining grammar. Tell me just like you did for HPSG and LFG, talk about tag and its association with Joshi.
Tree adjoining grammar HAG is a formal grammar framework introduced by Arvind Joshi in the 1980s. It is designed to handle complex syntactic structures and provide a detailed analysis of sentence structure. Key features of TAG. 1. Tree structures. TAG uses tree structures to represent sentences. These trees are adjoined to other trees to create more complex structures. 2. Elementary trees. TAG starts with a set of basic trees, called elementary trees, which represent simple syntactic constructions. 3. Adjoining operations. These basic trees can be combined or adjoined to form more complex trees, capturing various syntactic phenomena like coordination and embedding. 4. Declarative and modular. Tags rules are declarative, which means they specify what is possible without detailing a step-by-step process. This makes TAG a modular and flexible framework. Applications and impact. TAG provides a powerful tool for parsing and generating sentences in natural language processing. It can handle various linguistic constructs like movement, conjunction, and recursion, which are challenging for simpler grammatical frameworks. Arvind Joshi and his colleagues detailed TAG in works such as Tree Adjoining Grammar, a formalism and computational analysis published in 1985.
Now, can you exemplify, like for example, a real world situation where the application of tag and the various levels that it has, and how that how that element of understudy, how that element understudy undergoes the processes of tag and extracts various information at different stages of the process. So, can you go ahead and exemplify every every mechanism or step or level that lies beneath the tree adjoining grammar?
Sure. Let's look at how Tree Adjoining Grammar tag works with a real-world example. Parsing a complex sentence. Example sentence. The cat that the dog chased sat on the mat. Step-by-step tag process. 1. Elementary trees. Noun phrase NP. Tree represents the cat and the dog. Tree represents actions like sat on the mat. Relative clause tree represents that the dog chased. Each of these trees captures a basic syntactic unit and its structure. 2. Adjoining operations. Attach the relative clause. Start with the NP tree for the cat and attach the relative clause tree that the dog chased to it. This forms a complex NP structure, the cat that the dog chased, combined with main clause. Now take the combined NP and attach it to the VP tree, sat on the mat. This completes the sentence structure. The cat that the dog chased sat on the mat. 3. Parsing and generation. Parsing. During parsing, tag can handle the nested structure of the sentence. It begins by recognizing and building the elementary trees, then uses adjoining operations to integrate them, reflecting the complex relationships between different parts of the sentence. Generation. For sentence generation, tag can start with basic elementary trees and combine them to produce grammatically correct complex sentences, capturing the syntactic rules that govern how these elements can be combined. Real-world application. In natural language processing, NLP, tag can be used for tasks like machine translation and text-to-speech systems. For example, a translation system might use tag to accurately parse complex sentences in one language and generate corresponding sentences in another language, preserving the syntactic structure and meaning. Levels and mechanisms. 1. Elementary building blocks representing simple syntactic units. 2. Adjoining operations, mechanisms for combining elementary trees to form more complex structures. 3. Parsing, analyzing a sentence by constructing and combining trees to understand its structure. 4. Generation, creating sentences by combining basic trees into grammatically correct structures. By applying tag, we can capture and process complex syntactic structures efficiently, making it a powerful tool for various linguistic and computational tasks.
Now, can you exemplify, just like you did for the tree adjoining grammar, can you exemplify a real world situation in the context of HPSG, that is head driven phrase structure grammar, and how it analyzes, for example, any element under inspection, and how it generates output from the various processes involved under the phrase, head driven phrase structure grammar. So just like you did for tag, do it for the HPSG, that is head driven phrase structure grammar.
Certainly. Let's use head driven phrase structure grammar, HPSG, to analyze and generate this sentence. We'll go through the process step by step. Example sentence: she quickly finished the book. Step by step HPSG process. 1. Lexical entries. Word level information. In HPSG, each word is associated with a detailed lexical entry specifying its syntactic, semantic, and morphological properties. For instance, she, a pronoun with features for subject, case, and singular number. Quickly, an adverb modifying the verb with information about how it affects the verb. Finished, a verb with entries for its argument structure, e.g., requires a subject and an object. The, a definite article that provides information about noun phrases. Book, a noun with features indicating it can be the object of a verb. 2. Phrase structure rules. Sentence structure. HPSG uses phrase structure rules to build syntactic structures. For this sentence, this forms the subject-noun phrase. VP, quickly finished the book. This forms the verb phrase, where quickly modifies finished, and the book is the object-noun phrase. 3. Head-driven approach. Head of phrase. In HPSG, the head of a phrase, usually the main verb or noun, determines the syntactic and semantic properties of the whole phrase. For example, finished is the head of the VP. It dictates the verb phrase's structure and its requirement for a subject and object. The book is a noun phrase headed by book, which provides details about the phrase's function as an object. 4. Feature structures. Unified representation. HPSG employs feature structures to represent linguistic information. Features such as tense, number, and case are unified across different levels of analysis. For example, subject and object agreement. The subject she and the object the book must agree with the verb finished in terms of grammatical features. Adverbial modification. Quickly modifies finished, providing information about the manner of the action. 5. Parsing and generation. Parsing. HPSG parses the sentence by constructing the feature structures for each lexical entry and phrase, ensuring they conform to the syntactic rules and constraints. The result is a detailed representation of the sentence's structure and meaning. Generation. To generate a sentence, HPSG combines the feature structures of words and phrases according to the grammar rules, ensuring that the final sentence adheres to grammatical constraints. Real-world application. In natural language processing, HPSG is used in applications like grammar-based machine translation and speech recognition. For instance, in machine translation, HPSG can help parse a source language sentence into a detailed syntactic structure, which is then translated into a target language while preserving grammatical relations and meaning. Levels and mechanisms. 1. Lexical entries, detailed information about each word. 2. Phrase structure rules, rules for combining words into phrases and sentences. 3. Head-driven analysis. The head of each phrase determines the phrase's properties. 4. Feature structures, unified representations of syntactic and semantic information. 5. Parsing and generation, building and interpreting sentences based on grammatical constraints. HPSG provides a robust framework for capturing the complexities of natural language, making it useful for various linguistic and computational tasks.
Now, in the same way, exemplify for the lexical functional grammar, the LFG that we talked about a while ago. Exemplify in the same way what mechanism underlies the LFG, an example of how a real world, constituent under investigation might be processed under the lexical functional grammar. So do that.
Certainly, let's use lexical functional grammar, LFG, to analyze and generate a sentence. We'll walk through the LFG process step by step. Example sentence, she quickly finished the book. Step-by-step LFG process. 1. Lexical entries, word-level information. In LFG, each word has a lexical entry detailing its syntactic and semantic properties. For instance, she, a pronoun with a lexical entry specifying its role as a subject and its features such as case, nominative, and number, singular. Quickly, an adverb modifying the verb with information about how it affects the verb's meaning. Finished, a verb with an entry specifying its argument structure, requiring a subject and an object. The, a definite article that helps in constructing noun phrases. Book, a noun with features indicating it can function as the object of a verb. 2. Functional structure. Functional structures. LFG uses 2 main levels of representation, the conjunctive structure, C structure, and the functional structure, F structure. C structure. This represents the syntactic structure of the sentence, showing how words combine into phrases. For example, she forms the subject NP, Quickly finished the book forms the VP, and within that VP, quickly modifies finished, and the book is the object NP. F structure. This represents the grammatical functions and relationships. For instance, the F structure will capture that she is the subject. Finished is the main verb, and the book is the object. 3. Functional unification. Unification of structures. LFG ensures that the C structure and F structure are compatible through unification. For example, the verb finished in the F structure will have features that require it to have both a subject and an object, which will be reflected in the C structure. 4. Parsing and generation. Parsing. LFG parses the sentence by constructing both C structure and F structure representations. The C structure shows the syntactic arrangement, while the F structure reflects the grammatical roles and relationships. Generation. To generate a sentence, LFG constructs the C structure and F structure from the given grammatical rules and lexical entries, ensuring that they are consistent with each other. Real-world application. In computational linguistics, LFG is used in applications like syntactic parsing and natural language generation. For example, in machine translation, LFG can be used to parse a sentence in the source language into detailed syntactic and functional representations, which can then be translated into the target language while preserving grammatical roles and relationships. Levels and mechanisms. 1. Lexical entries. Detailed information about each word, including its syntactic and semantic properties. 2. C structure. Represents the syntactic structure of the sentence. 3. F structure. Represents the grammatical functions and relationships. 4. Unification. Ensures that C structure and F structure are compatible. 5. Parsing and generation. Building and interpreting sentences based on the grammatical rules. LFG provides a framework for understanding and generating complex sentences by capturing both the syntactic and functional aspects of language. This approach helps in various linguistic and computational tasks, making it a powerful tool in natural language processing.
Yeah, we'll meet soon.